Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Genesis Home Podcast, where we talk to experts in real estate, finance, business, community, and beyond, covering topics that are important to us. Let's listen in. Hey, everyone. It's Rita. And guess who's back? Hey, Jason.
Hey, Rita. Thanks for having me on again. I really appreciate it.
What I love about this is you were in the very beginning of this podcast as well. So this is really cool in like both aspects. And one of the things we covered in there was that we were both introverts.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing about that is people often assume when you start a business or you're building a business that you have to be really like outgoing and this like energetic. But I think as introverts, we have a unique skill set. So how do you balance being an introvert and building a business?
I mean, I think you got to learn balance. You do have to put yourself out there, right? Like, you can't be a business owner, startup founder, and never talk to anyone. So you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and putting yourself in like uncomfortable situations. Also, you got to learn tricks. Like, for example, me, suppose I go to a networking event. It starts at 6 p.m. If I get there at 6:30 p.m., it's a waste of my time because I know I'm not going to go talk to anyone because they're already in the little cliques, little groups of 3 or 4 people. And so it's a waste of my time. So what I do, like my hack is, if it starts at 6 p.m., I get there at 5:45. When people walk in the door, I introduce myself as they walk in the door and start conversations that way. Is one thing that I do at networking events.
Well, I mean, the cool thing about this is the fact that you are in HR. I mean, your business is HR based.
Yes.
So how do you explain to people, HR is really the heart and soul of any business. So you are a mixture of not just the trainee, but you're also kind of like the advocate for your clients and the businesses that you support. So how do you explain that in these networking opportunities that you get, because if that's like how you process?
Yeah. So first of all, like, I don't jump in talking about HR. I try to talk about what this person is doing or this company, and I try to find some kind of link between what they're talking about in the HR. They might talk about, our operating expenses are going to have to decrease, and then I'll talk about, okay, if operating costs to decrease, how's that going to affect your current employee base? Or you have to do layoffs, or how's that going to work? But yeah, I don't think you just jump in and talk about, what you want to do. You got to put the focus on them and try to find some kind of link between them and your company, some kind of way. And it might be not linking there at all, right? Maybe you just tell from the conversation that this person doesn't care about HR at all, and so it's time for them to move on. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, but now okay, so I have a tendency to dance around an issue, so I'm gonna get straight to it. When you started Cavness HR, you really had a problem with communication, because I remember the first time you and I spoke, this is way before there was like our Perspective podcast, you said that explaining things or communicating was a big issue for you. How did you address that, and what has been working?
So a lot of it was just practice. Like, when I first started, everyone thought I was going to be an HR consultant, and so I had to figure out how to communicate that, no, I'm actually an HR tech startup with a tech platform who also does like HR advice, right? And it was just a matter of practicing, put myself out there. And another thing too, like as a startup founder or whatever entrepreneur, one thing I had to get used to is like telling the same story like 1,000 times, right? Because sometimes you tell the same story over and over again in your mind, like, man, I've said this 100 times already. That's true, but you haven't told it to this next person yet, right? So you still have to have the same energy, same communication skills, same detail as if you never told it before. But yeah, just practice. And
do you think like having a system helps you when it comes to that?
I think it does. I mean, for me, it does. I mean, like, I'm the type of speaker where like I can't wing anything, right? I have to rehearse, right? Like, if I do public speaking, like I know some people, you could tell them, hey, give a 30-minute speech on the moon. They can get up there and give a 30-minute speech on the moon. Like me, I got to research, I got to practice, I got to rehearse. all those kind of things, right? I'm not a wing it type of person. I gotta, I won't say memorize it, but I gotta pretty much like, have my talking points in my head and kind of elaborate from there.
So you got to plan it out.
Yes. And one thing that's funny, like I know a lot of people like they'll practice their speech, whatever, and they practice for the other people. For some reason, I can't do that, right? Like if I practice in front of people, I just like freeze up and I can't talk. So when I practice, it's just being by myself in front of the mirror, right? So when I practice, I read it. I read it one time. I'll say it in my mind one time, and I'll say it out loud like 2 or 3 different times, right? But for some reason, I just like refuse to practice in front of other people. But once I get in front of people, it's okay if it's the real deal.
Honestly, I have the same problem as well. Like I can't talk to. I mean, one thing talk to like your friends and family. That's a different situation. But the practice round for me, I have to have a lot. I feel like I'm running through so many scenarios when I do that. And for me, just even the test run, I always assume what I think they're going to register with this.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
I never really thought about practicing in front of a mirror, to be honest with you. I always do this. You know how you have like meetings with yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do it from the mirror just to see what my facial expressions are and like hand movements and stuff like that.
Now, the cool thing is you have a podcast. Does that podcast help with your business? Because I've noticed it with, and I listen to it all the time. So it's not like I am a very big fan.
Thank you.
The great thing about your podcast is that it kind of gives your business a voice. Do you see a change in how you communicate since you started the podcast?
Yes, I've got a whole lot better, like even if you go like Joe Rogan's podcast, Gary Vee's podcast, or Tim Ferriss, any famous podcast out there, if you go to the very first podcast I ever did, it's going to be cringeworthy, right? Same with my first 10, 20 level cringeworthy, right? But you get better at asking questions, you get better at controlling the flow, you get better at picking the right guests. It's just a process. You get better equipment, you get better locations, better soundproofing, and you just get more comfortable doing it. And as far as the business, it's paid off in ways that it hasn't, right? So on my podcast, I used to talk to like small business owners or entrepreneurs. So this is my customer base. And like I've got like loads of beta testers, a few customers, but never knew like I thought it would pay off. What it's paying off really is like I got my board advisor from there. I've had 5 VCs on there who might invest in my company next year. So as far as like getting customers, no. But as far as like everything else, it's been paying off. And plus, a good thing about the podcast, that's for SEO stuff. If you Google my name, stuff comes up. So many people starting businesses, you Google the name, nothing comes out, right? So like obviously I'm not famous, but if you Google me, you'll be able to see what I've been doing the last few years. I know I'm just like a brand new person to the startup game. I've been in this for a while, so I have a track record, which is good. The podcast is good for.
Now, and I do agree with that because I remember my very first episode and it was interesting. And yes, a lot has changed since then. I think for both of us, when we first started out, we kind of had to like, I would talk to you about what you've used and how to like manage it. But have you seen a difference in and this is really a big question for me because in the first I'll say few episodes, you had Cavness HR or HR like a podcast, and then you changed it to the Jason Experience. Why?
So when I was doing the Cavness HR podcast, it was like 30 minutes long, real short, talking to HR people. And then it clicked in me, I'm interviewing HR people who work at companies or small business. They're not going to buy Cavness HR. So why am I talking to them, right? I need to be talking to small business owners, entrepreneurs. And most entrepreneurs don't want to go to HR podcasts. So I changed the Chasing Cavness Experience, talking to small business owners, other interested people. And I moved it from 30 minutes to like more of a long form conversation to get like do more of a deep dive in them, like how they started their business, their journey, some of the fun they did, So basically, yeah, it was like the client. I want to change the guest of the podcast. Because if you're an HR director, are you going to buy HR from Cavness HR? Probably not. This is what my mindset was when I made the change.
Now, the interesting thing is you said that part of it was due to the branding of it, like the image behind it. Did you feel like part of it was you as well? I mean, you've learned so much over this process, not just as a startup, but as a kind of like a spokesperson or representation of your business. Have you learned the importance of having something for yourself in relation to the business?
Yes, definitely, without a doubt. You know, like when we first started the podcast, is all focused on Cavness HR, focused on the guests. And now it's like more, like more of the experience of Jason Cavness, like, get my name out there, doing the branding, of course, it's still tied into to Cavness HR, but yeah, definitely branding myself, putting myself there. Like, if you Google, Sam Brandon person, nothing comes up on Google. If you Google my name, at least 10 pages comes up on Google, right? For different podcasts, different articles I've done, just different items in general, right? So definitely branding is a good part of it. I always tell like new startup founders, like, put yourself out there, do a blog, do a podcast, do something where if someone Googles your name, something comes up.
Right, but I think, and that's true too. I think, and you've said this to me that I hide behind my brand, and that was a bit of a struggle in getting the word out there. Trust me, I've definitely learned from a lot of the things you've said, and I am grateful for that. And the one thing that I remember you mentioning was the power of one-on-one, and how that's really, as an introvert and as a startup, that those one-on-one connections are very important into building our businesses, and or building your business especially. Do you still feel like that one-on-one is still as important as it was when you first got started?
I do. For example, with my podcast, like everyone will tell me, Jason, you're not an introvert, you have a podcast, you're an extrovert. And I said, no, think about it. I have a podcast, it's one-on-one, and I control everything in the podcast, right? The questions, the length, who I'm interviewing. So it's really an introvert, thing to do. But one-on-one is like very important, I think, because you get no person, more their wants and desires, what the company needs, and this is just a better interaction too. I mean, you have to speak in front of people. You have to do pitch competitions or stuff like that, talk to a group of people. But are you making a connection? Probably not, right? If you talk to 50 people, you don't get to know them. But then afterwards, you talk to 2 or 3 of them, you get to know them, know about the company, what they're doing. So I think, to me, one-on-one is very important. Now, is that scalable? Of course not. That takes a long time. If you talk to like 5 people a day at 20 minutes, that takes up a lot of time. Even though, like, I remember hearing somewhere, if you're looking for a job or starting a company, you should talk to 1 new person each day. Is that realistic? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But I still big believe in the power of one-on-one. You just get to know people better that way, I think.
Do you also see that do you think part of that is because you're an introvert, or is just something that you realize that is kind of a way to build your community and because you mentioned control, keep some form of the control in that process, and especially in the language?
Yes, I'm gonna answer both. Definitely, the one-on-one's good. And for example, with me, if I'm on a group of people, like suppose I'm with 5 people or like networking, talking, I usually don't say much, someone might say something and I'll think of an answer for too long in my head. By the time I have the right answer, they're like the 3 topics on down the road, right? So if I say something like, man, Jason's slow. We talked about that for about 5 minutes ago, right? So I definitely think that they're in control, and it's just more comfortable for me talking one-on-one with somebody versus in a crowd. And plus, from a crowd, I kind of want to listen to people, see what they say, versus inputting, my thoughts all the time.
Well, the good thing about being a crowd, you have the center of attention.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I think also when you're an introvert, the superpower that we do have is the fact that we are very good listeners, because we're not the center of attention. So we get to listen to what people are not necessarily thinking, but what their thought process is. So when we do have that one-on-one time with them, we know how to approach them. How do you know when to not isolate, because that's not a good choice, but know when to approach?
And that's a good question.
A friend of mine. That's really been like, I know what these people are saying. I know how to respond, but there are moments where I'll just go, when is the good time to have those kind of moments? And I think for someone like you who has such a people-based and business kind of community, I think that would be a little bit more sensitive to you on not just on the one-on-one just for the brand of the podcast, but also for Cavness HR as well, in the sense of how to solve those problems in their business.
So one thing I do, like example, I actually went to a pitch event last night to watch some pictures, and like every time there's a group of people they were talking, once I could tell the talk's about to end, I would just say to everyone there, like, can you type your name to my LinkedIn, right? And so of course they typed the name to LinkedIn. And I suppose yesterday I was a group of 4 people, me included. So 3 other people there. They all typed the name in my LinkedIn. There's one I actually want to talk to. So that one I'll reach out to maybe next week is, hey, you want to follow up in a conversation, right? So that's one thing I do. I'm a big believer in LinkedIn. So he's always follow up later on at your own convenience, so to speak.
Well, now you have a newsletter on LinkedIn too. You know
Yes.
that. Yes.
Yes.
What's that like?
It's interesting, right? It's nowhere near what I want to be. It's like I just like copy and paste my show notes. I know I won't get to the point where I actually have like some of the verbiage of podcasts in there, like the questions I ask the people, the answers I give, and get it more interactive. But it's been pretty good so far. I got almost like 5,500 subscribers. It's crazy to me. Like 2,000 people read it every week. So I do my podcast on there. I also do updates for Cavness HR on there too. But it's been very interesting.
Do you think social media has helped you come out of certain parts of like your comfort zone? Because you mentioned LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Social media has been a big help. Just getting used, like getting your camera, videotaping yourself during the day. Making like I do like a daily HR tip on pretty much everyone's social media: LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. All those kind of things. It's been a big help. I mean, another thing, like I tell entrepreneurs, like you have to be on social media. I mean, even if you're introvert, do some kind of video. Talk about your company. You just have to get comfortable with. Because if you're the CEO, you're the face of the company, and how can you be the face of the company if you're always hiding yourself?
Yes, I'm fully aware of that. As I am talking to you, you are not seeing my face.
I wasn't gonna say nothing about that, but since you brought it up.
Yes, I'm fully aware. I mean, it's not that you haven't seen my face before.
Yeah.
It's just I'm weird. So, and you're right. Social media does play a role in that because it also allows us to communicate in a different way, and we have like kind of like the safety of our platforms. My question is, how do you build? Because social media can be very toxic, even for an introvert. Because you get trolls, you get people that the Google experts, which we all know is a very real thing. How do you maintain a positive community surrounded by all that crazy?
It's hard and easy to do. Like you can't, how do I put this? So you can't take anything personal, even though it is personal. Like if someone like puts on your post, this is the worst idea of all time. I mean, how do you not take it personal, right? You just gotta kind of ignore it, right? If the best you can. And another thing you gotta remember too, like post with 100 people read your post or see your video. Probably 99 will say, "Man, I really like this content," but they're not gonna post anything because that's they just won't. The one person who doesn't like it, they'll post something negative, right? So you just got to think of every person who posts something negative. There's probably 99 to 100 or more like actually like it or just don't take the time to like it or post it, right? And then it's kind of you got to ignore it, right? I mean, so on one hand, people say don't read your comments because of the trolls and the negativity because they bring you down. Then being an entrepreneur, like you kind of have to read your comments so you get customer feedback and see what's going on. But if you got like one post that says you're the worst speaker in the history of the world and this is just horrible, I mean you got to ignore that. But another one says, hey, I like your podcast, I like your company, but you need to do 1, 2, 3. Well, you maybe need to pay more attention to the second one. And then, of course, they'll say, if someone just goes, post something, oh my goodness, Cavness HR, the best Kevin in the history of the world, blah, blah, blah. This is the best thing ever. Maybe ignore that because it's just too much hype and too much, you know, good stuff for you. Because you definitely learn more from the um critical feedback versus trolls or the two other side of it. Another thing too about the social media, like me, I'm on everything because like I write blogs. So Twitter, it's like a writing platform. TikTok's videos, Instagram's videos, LinkedIn's more like typing like words. Find out what's best for you. If you're a great writer, do a blog, post on LinkedIn. If you're charismatic and have a great speaking voice or just naturally funny, maybe do videos. Just find out what works for you.
What would be, see, when people say find out what works for you, it goes in my head that when you first start out, the assumption is that you have to get it right the first time. You and I both mentioned that our first podcast episode was kind of cringy. We still was trying to figure that out. How do you get people past that hump of, it's not going to be perfect the first time. It's not supposed to be. And this entire conversation, we realized we keep saying it's not going to be good the first time. It's not going to be this way the first time. People are going to have opinions on it. How did you learn to get over that hump and just say, you know what, I'm just going to go for it?
Be honest, it's still hard. Like in my mind, I always tell myself, hey, I'm gonna make a video at least once a day about my business or something else. And I'll do it like 3 or 4 days and I'll stop for a week, and I try to catch back up. It's very hard. It's not natural to put a phone in front of your face and do a video unless you're like Gary V or someone that does that all the time. It's a hard thing to be consistent with doing that, and you just got to recognize that. And maybe if you do skip every day, just don't beat yourself up about it. And I know it's like, what do you want to do with your daily videos? Like me, I try to do a daily HR tip and like some kind of update on the business or like something else along those lines. So maybe you just want to do a video one day talking about how you're doing the design of your app, or maybe you want to do a video one day of how you take care of a customer. I mean, it's really unlimited what you want to do, and just realize it's going to be cringeworthy the first times you do it. I mean, it's going to be cringeworthy down the road too. You're never going to be perfect unless you can afford like a media team to get everything perfectly timed and lined up. And no one has the money for that at this stage, I don't think. But it's just a matter, you have to be consistent and do it over and over again, and just know your right angles. Like simple tricks like don't look down the phone, have the phone in front of you. All this you can Google, and like there's one guy I follow called Deepak Sakur. He's like an SEO guy out of England. He does like a daily video every day, first in the morning. He just says like crazy funny stuff, right? The lighting's bad, there's like track all over. And that's how he does his stuff, so whatever method works for you.
You said something that was really interesting about, the consistency. How do you stay, because even when you do take your breaks, because you do, how do you know when it's time to come back?
Just it's I would say personal feeling, but just so usually when I skip like posted videos because I have a busy day, like I have a lot of meetings or I wake up late. That's the two. Like me personally, like I like to wake up 4 in the morning. So I wake up at 4 in the morning, I get a good start of the day, and I'll be able to like make videos first in the morning or by 5 or 6. If I sleep in like 8, 9 o'clock, I'm behind. It just the day gets away from me, right? But it's just a I won't say feeling, but almost like an instinct or urge. Like JJ ain't posting in a while. You got some free time, like post something, talk about something. But another thing too, I think a lot of people too worry too much about what time of the day to post. Of course, there's studies out there on Instagram post at this time of the day, TikTok post this time of day, same thing on LinkedIn, but I mean, like me personally, I don't have time to like, okay, at this time I'm gonna do a video because that time I might need to do something else.
You know what? This is a great way to segue into a very interesting question. Can introverts be influencers? Because you said it yourself when you're on the podcast, they think you're an extrovert, and you're not. You're actually not at all. I mean, that's just your temperament. But because we use social media so much to advocate and communicate our business and market our brands and all that other stuff, and I don't mean brand in the sense of like, sounding like the ShamWow guy or anything like that, but I mean branding in the sense of building a community. When is it that we as introverts, we have to become more of influencers, or are we focusing more on just being strong community builders?
I think we could be influencers just because of the fact, and of course, there's a generalization. It's like usually if you're an extrovert, you're out there talking, blah blah blah, and you can come across as it's not being authentic as an extrovert sometimes, right? Because you just joining the conversation, saying first thing in your mind. Where you're introvert, it seems like you're more like authentic because you're taking time to think and actually telling your true feelings and being empathetic. So I really think you can be influencer as introvert. Now, of course, if it's like be influencer for some kind of I don't know, party game or fun thing, maybe not. I mean, extroverts are way better than that kind of stuff. But yeah, I definitely think introverts both do a great job building communities. Of course, depending on what kind of community you're trying to build. If you're trying to build a community where everyone buys stuff from you, maybe that's better for extrovert. But if you're trying to build a community where people actually give value, solve problems, and help each other out, maybe introverts better at that.
Do you think part of the reason why we as introverts would be good influencers is because time is precious to us?
Yes, without a doubt. That's a very great point. Time is very precious. Yeah, as an introvert, I really pay attention to what I spend my time on or don't spend my time on usually.
I think that when we discuss, because you and I are both on social media. You're on TikTok, you're on Twitter, you're on Snapchat. I should be more active on my Snapchat. I am not. For you, I think those moments that you do take out for social media are important to you. And when you're building a business or a brand, and once again, I like to reiterate, when I say brand, I don't mean, fit tea. I mean like building a community, building something that has sustainability. Your time management skills are slightly different than what would be considered a traditional influencer. So would you consider yourself a type of influencer?
I mean, I would say no, because when I think influence, I think somebody big like Neil Patel, Hidden Shaw, of course Gary Vee, all these other people, all those Instagram people, all the people on LinkedIn. Like my newsletter on LinkedIn has 5,000 people. I know someone on LinkedIn has a newsletter with like 555,000 followers, right? So I definitely don't. But then I know people know me. They're like, no, you are an influencer. I mean, I do have like 20,000 followers on LinkedIn. People follow my posts. Like yesterday at this event I went to, like 3 people came to me and said, "Hey, you're Jason, right?" I said, "Yeah." And they told me, "Oh, I see your podcast all the time," all that kind of stuff. So I don't, in my mind, I'm not an influencer, but some people might disagree, I think.
Well, what do you consider an influencer? Because I view you as an influencer.
I guess
it's not because of the podcast or anything.
Yeah.
I view you as an influencer because I gotta find that video, but there was a video on TikTok actually, as after I got through watching a video of you in Texas, going to a meeting. I think it was a event. There was a video behind that on the definition of an influencer, and an influencer is someone who encourages or should inspire an action or change. And through your videos of like your daily tips, the clips you have of the podcast, what your LinkedIn blogs and your newsletters and everything, in a way, aren't you influencing a conversation or an action?
I mean, when you put it like that, I have to answer yes. But I mean, like I would have kind of crazy if I said no. But yeah, when you put it like that definition, I mean, yes. But I guess in my mind, I just see influence like somebody like reaches like millions of people.
Well, I mean, and I'm glad we are having this conversation. And why it was so important to have you on is because you do provide a different perspective. During the pandemic, we've seen what happens when everything shuts down and we have to meet ourselves. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The image and the idea of certain things kind of changed. Like I love rap, and Diddy is a rapper technically. And in one of the videos, he's gray. His beard was gray, his hair was gray, like he looked like, you know, a regular guy in New York to me. But when things started, like businesses started opening, things like that, clearly he dyed his hair and he cleaned up his beard and everything. But he still looked like Diddy, but then the facade came back. I think influencers going forward are not going to be as image oriented as they are today, as they were, as they were before the pandemic. Do you think, as someone who networks so much on social media, do you think that are you seeing the same changes or something similar to that? Because you're more active on it than I am. So this is a perfect thing to ask. And I've been wanting to ask you that for a while. Like, do you see a change in how social media is being perceived now, especially in the eyes of influencers, small businesses, and things like that?
I think a lot depends on the platform. I think on Instagram, everyone's still doing the facade, you know, dressing up, making sure the makeup's right, making sure the clothes are perfect. We're on TikTok, you know, you just see someone there doing a dance or doing whatever, and like, you know, the hair's not combed, there's no makeup on. It just like TikTok's more like more natural, more, you know, in the moment. Where Instagram, like I don't want to say stage, but it's more like, okay, like Instagram is like more film crews, more this, more that. And TikTok's more like, okay, let's be our natural self. But that is to play around, like me. Like I used to like, you know, I want to be dressed, my hair combed. Like there's times when I'll be at home, like, you know, I'll just be in my night clothes and my hair uncombed. I'll have an idea, like, well, I'm not gonna post this. I look like crap, right? And so I won't post, and I have to wait, you know, wait for another day. But yeah, definitely, I think the platform plays a lot of impact in that on how, you know, dressed up or not dressed up someone gets.
So you think it's based off of the platform, not necessarily the culture itself?
I think it's a platform, yeah. And of course, you know, some people out there, like we all know people like you never see them without their makeup on or their hair combed, like they're looking perfect. Other, you know, the best clothes on. Other people will see them and they'll be like, "Just okay, this is me today. I didn't comb my hair. I'm just gonna go out and about, have like, you know, warm ups on. I don't care how I look." So I think a lot of it, that has a lot to do with it too. But I think it has a lot. What are you comfortable with presenting to the world?
Well, the great thing about you is the fact that you don't fake it. And I think that's what a lot of people gravitate towards, which is why I asked the question of, do you view yourself as an influencer? Because even with, you know, the behind the scenes stuff that you do and everything, it's all very raw. And do you think the honest openness of your content has impacted or changed your status somewhat, as someone who's just an avid social media user to someone that might be considered an influencer?
I think so. Like you say, you know, I do the raw stuff. I'm consistent. It's the same thing every day. Like I know people out there on social media. One day, you know, this is a slight exaggeration, but one day they're posting a tuxedo. Next day they're posting, you know, they're in a pig farm. Next day they're posting something else. There's no consistency, and it's all, it'll sell stuff. So I think being authentic and consistent has been paying off for me, because it's the same thing all the time. You know, you're gonna get with me.
But okay, so my question to that would be, and now I'm going to bring back the original question: Can can introverts be influencers?
Yes, I believe we can. I definitely believe we can. I mean, without a doubt, introverts can definitely be influencers. Now, of course, they're going to do it different than the extroverts do. We're definitely be influencers, I believe.
And do you think because we're introverts, the influence market or culture would have a different impact? Like, it wouldn't be traditional. Once again, it's not the same as an extrovert, where there's a lot of, like you said it before, it's that that preparation is always there. For us, it really is not as much as the preparation in the image, but really in the substance. So what do you think? So when we build our businesses and we're building these brands and everything, what do you think our focus should be when it comes to social media or marketing?
So one thing I think the biggest difference is between an extrovert influence and an introvert influencer. I think the extrovert influencer is going to have like a bigger impact short term, where an introvert, our impact would be more long term, if that makes any sense. Because extroverts, they're in the now, get customers now, get whatever the community now, and we're more like planners. So our stuff is going to be more long term. So we might suffer in the short term, but I think our long term play would be way better than extroverts, because with extroverts, they'll pay attention, a little while, and then they'll get bored and move on to someone else. With us, once you build a community, we'll like stay with them and continue to build a community for the long term. So I think that's one big difference.
What do you think introvert influencers or influencers who are introverts, what do you think that future would look like? Because you always say everything is gradual. So what would be gradual for someone like that? Like, I don't view myself as an influencer. I am okay with my status as not being considered that. But you have such a presence now that you are on there now. That is really a very real conversation that you should be having, and we should be having. That what, as someone who's built a social media community off of being an introvert, what future does that look like? Like, where does the future hold over someone who is an influencer but an introvert?
So one thing I think I need to do a better job at is like linking the social media stuff to customers, right? Like, suppose, I put out the social media, how's it paying as far as getting customers? So I need to do a better job of that as far as like, being a quote unquote influencer. Because at the end of the day, if you're on social media and you're an influencer or not an influencer, you want to, quote unquote, influence people to buy your product, right? So how do you influence people to do that? How do you leverage your social media? And then, like, if you're on social media, we'll say Instagram, for instance, and like put you out like 5,000 followers on Instagram, but only 100 are small business owners. Is that really paying off for you? Of course, the 5,000 is a good number, but if only 100, I'll give me a better example. So LinkedIn, I have 20,000 followers on LinkedIn, but if only 500 are like small business owners, why are the other people following me? Like, is it really good for my business to have all these followers? So how do you focus on the people who are actually target customers? Now, of course, all the people, they know people, small business owners, all the kind of stuff, the numbers look good, all that kind of stuff. But just leveraging your social media to bring the best impact to your business. Or maybe you want to, maybe you have a, 10,000 followers on Instagram and you do into new nonprofits. How do you leverage all your followers to improve your nonprofit? It's a tricky thing, I think.
So followers for us would not be the same as followers for an extrovert. So let's say, for argument's sake, let's bring back a popular extrovert. So what's a good one? No. Yes, let's bring back Kim Kardashian.
Okay.
Okay, Kim Kardashian is an extrovert in a way. She even says that she does. So her followers are essentially customers. I mean, they follow her for the show, they follow her for, what she's marketing, how her face looks like that, the exercise routines that she does and everything. Her followers mean this to her. What would a follower look like to you? Like, what would your followers look like to you in your head? Because the followers to us mean something different than it would be for an extrovert, because everything to us has an impact.
Yeah, for me, it'd be more like someone who like wants to have a deep connection, someone who wants to get to know me, someone who wants me to get to know them, someone who's like, interesting person, right? Someone who's involved, like, wants to learn about space, technology, philosophy, how to, make the world a better place. But a main thing, probably like to have someone who wants to have like a deeper connection with me.
So what would that translate to in building of the business?
So in theory, if someone knows you better, they're going to trust you better. And then they trust you better. In theory, they should like buy your products from you, I think. Is that true or not? I really don't know. And then again, like some people get to know you deep and really get to know you and never buy your product. Some people might not even know you and buy your product. So I might be off course here, but that's my theory right now. The better the people know you, the more likely they're going to buy something from you, I think.
So you think part of it is by them getting to know you, it kind of opens the conversation to getting to know your business.
Yes. Jason's a good guy. He's has good values, so in theory his business should be pretty good too, and decent and all that kind of stuff.
That's very mom and poppy of you.
Yes, it is. Now that you say that, yeah, it's very mom and poppy, yeah.
Do people still have mom and pop shops? Good, I hope so. I miss those.
Yeah, they do.
But that's very, because the best way to put it is like very mom and pop. Like, when you go into a corner store and you like that guy's been around for a while, and he understands the neighborhood. That's a very mom and pop approach to business, and that's a very mom and pop approach to your branding as well, because once again, we've mentioned so many times about the power of 101. So if we're leaning in, I can't believe that book is still in my head. If we're leaning in to the power of 101, for you, your social media as an influencer, that power would have to have the same connection when you either have 500 people or 5,000, that they have to have that some form of connection with you and so for them to have that connection with your business. Have you seen it translate into the connection of your business?
Yes and no. I mean, I haven't gotten as many customers as I would like from it, but I think that's going to start pretty soon. But it's like people, comment on posts and like, big positive reactions, or I'll see someone out in Seattle and say, "Hey, I follow you on social media. I really like your post on HR." So those things are definitely paying off. It's just like taking the next step to bring in more customers.
So for you, the biggest concern is conversion?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yes.
How do you see, you mentioned that you see that will probably change over time. Where do you see the change is going to be at?
So part of it is totally my fault. I haven't spent enough time on sales in the past. I haven't and for a long time I sucked at follow up. Like suppose someone would send me a message and I would I won't say ignore, I'll forget about it, or like too much time will go by. So I'm doing better at following up with people. I'm actually sending like sales emails. I'm actually calling people on the phone now. Like for example, when if someone likes post about HR, I'll search them on LinkedIn. If they're a small business owner, I'll send them a LinkedIn request. So just doing those kind of things now. I mean, of course, I've been doing that from the beginning, but for whatever reason, I just didn't do it. But I think I'm getting way better at that stuff now. Let's do the follow up.
So you think it's more of learning, getting comfortable with the consistency of following up and staying connected.
Yes.
Is the important part. Do you think also part of the problem is, and this is just someone who's, once again, I listen to your podcast and I love the fact that you incorporate not just the HR, like the people that we see every day, like the names, but the people like behind the scenes as well, that we don't talk about the money enough, and we don't talk about these things enough. Do you think part of the concern is that it is not, and I'm trying to, I know it's going to come across mean, but it's not, I'm not trying. But how come you don't use the podcast as a conversation piece in forms of like questions. Because let me give you an example. There was one that I loved, and then she's a VC, and she was discussing the importance of grassroots and Kickstarter programs in building of businesses or projects. As someone with your experience, and not just in HR, but in project management in general, because remember, you and I, we've been talking for years. So I've literally, this is like a cool experience for me watching this whole thing from the very beginning. And I noticed you don't mention that outside of the podcast, like the role of, of HR and, kickstarting or building of those projects. You've mentioned it, you've hinted at it in the very beginning of them, but you stopped. Is there a reason why, or it just didn't fit you anymore?
It's not really a reason. I just don't do it. I mean, part of it because I don't want to be an HR podcast. I want like to be other than HR. Makes any sense?
Yeah.
And sometimes just a flow of conversation. Like sometimes I mean to bring up HR, but then the flow of conversation goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's I don't know if you see a point. Like people tell me all the time, you should spend some time talking about HR. Another thing too, like sometimes I would ask HR questions and they would give like off the wall answers. Like I remember one time I asked someone how you do hiring, and they gave the most like jacked up answer ever, right? So it's like, man, I can't let anyone know you said this, right? So let me delete it, right? So that's part of it too. And then another thing too, everyone thinks of HR differently. Some people HR is only benefits, some people only like recruiting, some people only like payroll. So it's hard to do, but I definitely see a point. And other people told me to like do like an HR part, and I did in the past. Just I don't know. This I guess didn't feel natural. So I always feel like it was forced when I try to do it.
That makes sense, because the thing is that there's like certain topics in your podcast, which is why it was so like, once again, this is part of the reason why you're here, is that I learned so much from those episodes. And the one thing I noticed is that after the episode's over, it's like there's so many questions up in the air. And in the beginning of your podcast, what I loved was the fact that you would ask questions after, like, so you would have the episode, and then it would, on the next post or something, you've always had like a tip, but then you've also had a question. And I miss that. And I always wondered, and it was a question that was always in my head. I always wondered what happened to that, because I thought that was really cool. And I tried to, like, because on Spotify, they allow you to incorporate it on your podcast. Like at the bottom, like if you want to do like an opinion poll or something. But I loved how you incorporated it into like TikTok and your Snapchat. Like your Snapchat always had like that question part in it. And I always wondered what happened to it, because it was so good. And I was just wondering, is it because you've incorporated more into the episodes itself and you just didn't really see the need for it? Or was it something because it was already answered in the podcast itself? It just wasn't. It was always a fascinating thing. And I tried to do it with Genesis, I'm going to be honest with you, and I just felt like I did not get the same. You do it differently. You do it kind of like, it's the best way to put it. It's kind of like being at someone's house and you have like those icebreaker questions. And you made it very homey. And I just was wondering why is it just because it just didn't resonate as much as you thought it would, or something? Because that was really awesome.
Be honest, I really have no idea why I stopped. Or maybe I got tired of doing it, or maybe I thought time would be able to doing something else. Well, I definitely I'll go back to doing it. Yeah, I just and to be honest, I didn't even notice I stopped for a while until someone else brought it up. Because you're always experimenting with stuff and trying to do different things. And
well, it's just that your podcast is totally different, and it's a great role model to me, in my opinion, because it's not flashy. You're not a flashy person, and the great thing about your podcast is that it doesn't force itself to be flashy. And it's a for people who are not in the episode, it's a very like nice, safe space to ask the questions that you want to ask, but you're not sure it's appropriate because you're not the finance guy. You're not, you're the average person. So it was always fascinating to me of how could you build something like that? Like it has this ripple effect. And I always wanted to know, how did you achieve that with that podcast? Because that's a really cool part of the whole Jason experience, to be honest with you. I mean, YouTube's great, all that's great, but it's just something about the way you make it like you're at a barbecue and you're chilling with some sweet tea. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're dealing with professional and like they have like MBAs and all this other stuff, but you make it very grassroots, and I love that. And basically what I was trying to lead up in this entire like on and off conversation that we've been having is, how did you achieve that?
I mean, I think you got to make a guest as comfortable as possible. Like when we first got started, I asked him, is there anything you want me to ask you? And also, is there anything I want to talk about? So I know what not to bring up. And then always talk some kind of softball question. I had one lady on there. She was on the board of directors for the Girl Scouts in the state of Washington. So I started, hey, you're on the board of directors of Girl Scouts. It's safe to presume that you're a Girl Scout yourself growing up. So yes, I was. Well, can you talk about the experience? What do you get out of it? And she talked about 20 minutes about how fun the Girl Scouts was. And then she's happy, go lucky. Usually I have some bourbon in there. If they want to drink some bourbon, then of course that helps out a lot too. And one thing, just like doing podcasts, you just get better at asking questions. Like people say, how do you ask good questions? I ask what I want to know. And, usually you want to know, everyone wants to know too. And, everyone wants to sell something. You got to give an opportunity like to sell what they want to sell, put themselves out there. It's just been a process.
But even when they're selling, it still comes across as, I'm kicking it on the stairs with some cousins. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
People, yeah.
And
definitely.
And nothing against Joe Rogan and nothing against a lot of people, but for me, the best podcasters are the people that make you feel like you're part of the experience. And Joe Rogan already brought the experience with him. Does that make any sense?
It does.
Nothing against a lot of there's a lot of great podcasters, but a lot of them kind of brought their brand. The brand was already there before the podcast came, so all they had to do was just set up the podcast. This was really built from the ground up.
Yes.
And it was built in a way that there's an accessibility to it. And I was always curious on, how did you make that? Because Genesis is quirky. And the great thing I love about my podcast is that we're quirky. And you can tell we're quirky. But there's it's the best way to put it. It's like you're at home with Jason. Okay. And when they do have their like Shark Tank moment with their elevator pitch or whatever, it's not as forced. It's like, it's one let I'm a real estate agent out of New York, as you know I am. There's a, if you need anything, let me know type of thing. It's not a, I went to school here and I did this there and this. It's very relaxed. It's a very relaxed atmosphere that comes off when you listen. And I always wanted to know, how did you do that? Because I've been a guest on your podcast, and I can tell you right now, I felt very much myself. So I just wonder, how do you do that?
I mean, back to consistency, practicing, experimenting. I mean, you got to be yourself. Like, you can't be one way, one type of guest, another way, another type of guest. You just got to be consistent. And also, I think when I ask the guest, what do you not want to talk about, that lets them know, hey, well, I don't want to talk about, X, Y, Z. They know they don't have to worry about doing conversation. Let's talk about that. And I think a lot of podcast guests, they do podcast hosts, they do the gotcha thing, like, this happened 2 years ago. Let's talk about it, right? And the guests are like, well, I wasn't expecting this. You put me in a bad situation. So you got to, make them feel as safe as possible. Nothing's going to come up they don't want to talk about. is a big thing, I think. Another thing too, kind of subject's kind of funny. So my podcast, like that's a long form video podcast, like 2 hours. And every time people say like, how are we gonna talk for 2 hours? That's impossible, right? Okay, I'll do it, but yeah, I don't say I'm gonna talk for 2 hours. I'm not interesting. And every time the podcast is over, and they'll be like, why do we end the podcast? We only talk for 30 minutes. And I'll show them the time. I was like, oh my goodness, we talk for 2.5 hours. Yeah. They don't realize once you start talking, it's the time flies, especially, if you have interesting conversation.
Right. And that's why it was like, it threw me when when the podcast does end, the conversation kind of ends with it in a way, which is why I was like, when I have him here, I'm going to ask, what happened to the questions?
Yeah. A lot of times that's just like us like being tired or whatever. Like the one time it's so crazy. Had a podcast this year with a friend of mine, and this has never happened before in our podcast, right? Because usually before the podcast, we'll like make sure I'll go to the bathroom, all that kind of stuff. So like this podcast, I guess we drank like too much bourbon, and like so the podcast is like 3.5 hours long. Each of us had to go to the bathroom twice, right? So one time he left, I just started talking about whatever. By the time I had to leave, he started talking about whatever. So it's like it's pretty crazy, right? Like I never happened before, right? But
right, but that's like the cool part of your podcast. It's just it's that's why I said your podcast is kind of like my role model, because it is incredibly normal. It's like you're visiting someone's house and you're like, hey, you want a drink? Sure. You don't want to talk about, well, I don't want to talk about yesterday. All right, cool.
Yeah. Yep.
There's a simplicity behind it. And when you're an introvert, that's the one thing that I love, is just keeping things very simple, very relaxed. And obviously I'm going to mention the, other episode in this one. Like, so I'll mention, like, put like links down in the bio and the whole thing. But you have this way of, like even now, you and I are talking like we've always been talking.
Yes,
like we've had plenty of these conversations before. And it's just fascinating of how easy it is to talk to you. And, you and I both listen to podcasts all the time. We probably reference other podcasts and we use them but when it's not just the podcast, but it's the whole like social media environment that you've painted. And you can't, unless you say it, they're absolutely right. You can't tell you're an introvert unless you let them know, because you built this whole kind of like, I don't want to keep using safe space. I feel like that's been butchered a lot, but that's the best way I can explain it. That you've built a safe space for people to ask those questions and to engage. So for someone who's big on the one-on-one, the one-on-one, you built something that is one-on-one. You just may not see that one, but that's what you've done. And I was always curious about how did you do that? Like, was that just like inadvertent? Was that just like by like design?
I'm gonna say it's probably more luck than anything else. Luck and not giving up, being resilient, perseverance, all that kind of stuff. Just doing it again and again, like that kind of stuff. But like where I'm at now, I had no idea I'd be here, right? I mean, like I had no clue. Like, yeah, there's no way I thought I'd be here as far like social media, the podcast. It's definitely been a lot of surprising stuff. Like as an example, like I said, like yesterday at the pitch event I went to, 3 people said, hey, I know your podcast, Another thing that's crazy, I have like pocket agencies send me guests all the time. Right now I have 100 guests backed up who want to be on the podcast from different places, right? Which is to me is like insane, right? Like, and they're like pretty like one person, like the mayor of Scranton, Ohio wants to be on there. The former deputy governor of Nevada wants to be on the podcast. It's just like, to me, it's crazy. Like, what's going on here?
No, I get it. And that's why I'm like, this is incredibly cool, because I've never, when we first started out, it was, how are we going to explain our businesses? And now it's so we've got this far. How do we continue this? and looking at your podcast, and now, like I said, not just your podcast, but that whole thing you created, it's very introvert friendly, but it's also extrovert accessible. and I just wanted to learn, or wanted the people to learn, how you achieve that. And maybe, once again, you know me, I tend to like chop up my questions, but that's just really what the goal was, is to figure out, how did you, for someone who didn't have these big, platforms and these whole big thing, you essentially built an amazing, like, corner of communication for both the introvert and the extrovert. And I was just really curious, and I needed you recorded to explain how you did that.
I think the first step is, what's the goal of your podcast? What do you want to accomplish? And then, like, what kind of guests do you want? Like, what type of people do you want on your podcast? Do you want somebody flashy? Do you want someone down to earth? Do you want someone who's going to add value? There's some podcasts out there just for selling stuff. Some podcasts are just like for the person to talk about themselves. Like, what kind of value do you want to bring to your audience? Now, the audience you have now, the future audience, and then that's improving your craft. When if you first start out, you'll probably be horrible at editing, horrible at asking questions, horrible at everything. But more practice you get, the more better you get at doing things. Like one thing I'm really proud of. Every guest I have, they all say that I ask the best questions at any podcast they've been on, right? So I take pride in that, asking good questions. Ask questions that people want to know, and then you got to make it fun also, some kind of way. That's always try to ask. What do you do for fun? What's your hobbies? And also I think I do a good job of making like more personal, right? A lot of podcasts is talk business, startups. You're an entrepreneur. Like, how about you as a person? Like, because you can Google everything now. Just Google someone. Oh, John Smith, attended college at the University of Nevada during this time period, and this happened there, right? Like, or just like make it personable, make it reasonable, and kind of you got to make it fun too. And it's just a process. You're gonna get better at everything you do, and maybe it's like maybe you need to lower the tone of your voice. Just do different things like that. Make sure the guest is in the right place. Like for my podcast, every guest starts the microphone, and within 10 minutes, he's like halfway across the room, right? So I got like kind of wave him, come back to the microphone, those little things like that. Just practice, and then being, comfortable in your own skin. One thing too, like even to this day, even though I've done these podcasts, I'm sure you agree with your own self. I hate my voice. Everyone hates their voice, right?
Yeah.
So you got to get over that too, right? And it's crazy. Like when I edit my podcast, I edit one time, and I rarely listen to podcasts again, right? Because people are like, listen to a podcast so you can hear it. Like, well, first of all, I was there when it happened, and I already edited it one time. I don't need to listen to it a third time. But I know people who do like listen to their own podcast 3 or 4 times, like try to improve it, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I am not alone. Okay, because I hate the sound of my voice. I really do sound like I really do believe that my voice is like a raspy Minnie Mouse. Okay, so yes, which is why one of the reasons why I love podcasting is because you guys talk more than I do.
and that's another too. When people say, Jason Introvert, I'm like, well, think about in the podcast, because I have a thing called Otter. It's like a video transcription, and it tells you how much time you talk and the guest talk. And usually I talk 20 to 25, the guest talks the rest of the time, right? So my goal is usually like talk around 25% of the time and have the guest talk 75% of the time. So I'm like, well, if I'm an extrovert, why I'm letting them do all the talking, right?
But that's really the cool part, is that people assume that we have these things, or we did these things because we want to hear our own voices. That's not entirely correct. It's largely due to, we want people to see what we see every day. And how can we communicate that? Because, as you know, when I started the Genesis Home podcast, was because people kept asking about the network, or the other entrepreneurs, or what I'm doing have to do with businesses. And so of the blog was fine, but it still wasn't, there was still no communication. Like I wasn't feel like I wasn't reaching people. And now it's so different now. Now it's okay. So in one episode I had a managing broker on, and the thing that she discussed was the importance of being consistent in your business. And because of that, someone emailed me and asked me, so there's people that actually have to pay attention to agents when they process their transactions? Yes, we just don't randomly steal your money. That's not how this works. So, there's kind of a freedom in communication when you have a podcast. Like, there's things that you get to introduce to people that maybe a traditional Instagram post would not resonate or would not, translate well. And do you see, as someone who is a podcaster now, because yes, that's you, that's what you do now, someone who is a podcaster and, who writes a blog and everything, do you see that you are showing people a side of yourself and in a way your business that you normally would have never been able to present if you were just the introvert Jason?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, like so many people know about the company, about the podcast, like, in like different places. Like you mean, good thing about social media is like you can reach people like all over the world, all the states, people in New York City. Like if I didn't have the podcast, we would never met. There's so many people I would never met without the podcast. And the great thing about the podcast too, of course, is evergreen content. It's always, on Apple, iTunes, or whatever the case may be. But you can repurpose it. You can take a 2-minute clip and post on Instagram. You can cut out the best parts. You can always like repurpose it over and over again.
Right. And that's really the interesting part, is that as an introvert, we get to talk, but it's not that we get to talk. It's we get to show what we're trying to say. You mentioned all the time you mentioned in the beginning that you kind of have to practice. So when I go, and it's the same thing with me, there's a lot of prep work that goes in for me going to an engagement or an event. I just don't go, sure, let's do this. I can't do that. It drains me. I get emotionally drained. I have to there's a whole process that goes into it before I actually go to that, networking event or a speaking engagement, or just something simple as a pitch deck. There's a lot that goes into it. And for me, the great thing about podcasting is that while it does take a lot of preparation, the preparation is not for me. The preparation is really for the person. I'm not, and this too, it's not about us. It's about introducing this person that we get to enjoy without the cameras or without the mic. And we are introduced. That's why this is why I thought this was a really cool moment for me to have you on there, because you're the first person I told that I was going to have a podcast.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And you said, well, are you going to plan it out correctly? Like, how often are you going to do it?
Yeah, don't make my mistakes.
And I learned that once a week was a little much, but I also learned what the podcast meant and what it means in forms of just letting people know who you are and who these people are that you see every day or you interact with on a regular basis. And my question is, do you feel as an introvert, and this is going to be an introvert based question, but do you feel like as an introvert, you have changed in your advocacy for your business since the podcast?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. There's no doubt about that. It's definitely changed a lot. Like I'm more upfront, more willing to do, elevator pitches everywhere, more willing to put myself out there, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. As far as like that stuff, I've grown a whole lot since the podcast started. Just being more confident, all that kind of stuff plays a role in it too, I think. But yeah, it's definitely made a big difference from my point of view. I mean, there's no way I can deny that. It's been a big change, definitely.
Okay. And that's now for someone who I have quite a few people now that because of you, honestly, not really much me, because like I said, Genesis is a goofy podcast. Okay. I like everyone kind of brings themselves to it. My question is, what advice do you have for people who literally are starting this from the ground up?
Yeah. To put it simply, like just get started, right? Like, and not even have a podcast. Like, you want to get started a podcast, you want to learn how to salsa dance, you want to pick another language, start a business, whatever it is. Like, you've been meaning to start, and you're like, well, I need some more money. I need to buy some other equipment. I need to free up a weekend. Like, there's never gonna be a perfect time to start anything. Or I don't know what my spouse is gonna say. I got to do this. I just one more of this, or whatever the case may be. Or I'll do it after the NFL season's over with. I'll do it on Sunday afternoon. You always gonna have an excuse, right? I mean, you just got to take the small step. Just like you just got to start it. Even like you want to start a podcast. Maybe you don't get a guest. Maybe you just like write out your questions that you want to ask your guests. Research what kind of equipment you want to get. The good thing about podcasts, like I also have like a lot of expensive stuff now, but everyone starts with a web camera and a laptop, right, and a little cheap microphone. Like, don't go spend $10,000 when you're starting the podcast, but just get started. And other things about podcasts, like the stats show that probably 95% people started, they quit like after 10 episodes. So most podcasts, there's a lot of podcasts on Apple Podcast, Spotify, but most of them just stopped after 10 episodes. So you got to keep that in mind too. If you just do 11 episodes, you're way ahead of the game almost. But yeah, I would just say just get started.
I agree with that. Considering when we got started, I think mine was an app. Remember, I used Anchor, and it kept cutting off. And I think it was like a $10 headset, and it kept making me sound muffled. So that's actually really good advice. Just get started.
Yeah, and Anchor is a great platform if you're like getting started out. Anchor's free. If I would say like use Anchor for like maybe your first 20 episodes, but once you get past 20 episodes, you need to upgrade. Like you go to Libsyn or Spotify or another platform. Maybe pay a little bit of money. But Anchor is a perfect opportunity. Like, do you want to do this, right? A lot of people all do a podcast and they don't realize how much work it is or how unnatural it is, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think Anchor is a great way to get started. Maybe first 10, 20 episodes. But after 20 episodes, you definitely need to upgrade to another platform, I think.
Yes, I agree completely. I think at first you recommended Zoom for me, and then I tried that, and Zoom didn't edit the way I liked it, so I went to Google Workplace.
Okay.
And that really changed the game because I had the unlimited freedom, and then if I wanted to, I could have kept the video, modified the video, or just keep the audio, which is mostly I prefer the audio over the video. So, but
that's a great point. Definitely, there's all these like podcast platforms out there. I mean, don't do what people recommend. Of course, take into consideration, but do your own research. What's best for you? What do you feel most comfortable with?
I have one more question, and I have to ask this question because if I don't ask it, I'm going to regret it. What would be, because you do these little clips. How do you do the clips?
I do it on iMovie, Apple iMovie.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, it's Apple iMovie, yeah.
I've been using Canva this whole time.
Yeah, I've got Apple Movie. I've actually heard it's better to do it on. I actually heard it's better to do it on Canva, but I mean, I know iMovie, so I know how to do it easier.
Yeah, I've been using Canva this whole time, and I was wondering because yours is so clear, and I was just wondering how you did that. So it's iMovie. Oh,
yeah. You talking about the video clips, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, iMovie. I use iMovie.
That's okay. That solves that Scooby-Doo mystery. So really quick, Jason, where would they find you?
So like you said before, I'm pretty much everywhere. Jason Cavness on LinkedIn, pretty much Jason Cavness everywhere. LinkedIn. I'm mainly on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram. I need to get better on Twitter because on Twitter, that's all the HR people, all the venture capital people on Twitter. So
Yeah.
I need to get more on there. But LinkedIn is the best place to find me, Jason Cavness. Of course, you can email me at jasoncavness@cavnesshr.com.
Thank you so much for coming on again.
And thank you for stroking my ego all episode long.
Hey, I call it as I see it, and you know that. All right, I'll talk to everyone later. Bye.
Thanks, Rita.